Hello, I've been doing some more cutting of carbon fibre on my little CNC machine lately. You can see this this is the aftermath of a rather long cut. This outline here was about 3.5 hours just for that one cut, and then the rest of it with the holes and everything for the quadcopter frame, this is what that is, was probably about 6 hours total, so it's made quite a mess of this piece of MDF. So this video is mostly going to be about that miniquad frame, but I get questions quite often about what's happening with this CNC machine and does it still work and stuff like that. So I thought I might mention just a little bit about this at the beginning of this video. It's not really enough to make into a whole part for that series about the CNC machine. But anyway, the only thing that I've really changed is the water collection or the water expelling system. So that's it there, and the main problem was that the hole in the back corner of the table was getting clogged up. I don't think it was the hose itself, it was mainly just around that hole. So I took out the little plastic nozzle thing that I'd glued in there. It was never really glued in there very well anyway. The epoxy doesn't seem to hold onto aluminium and plastic very well. So I just took that out and I drilled out the hole from 4mm to 5mm, and I just left it completely open. And I cut an aluminium can into a shape just to carry the water away from there to across outside the edge of the bench that it's sitting on, and then I put a plastic funnel there with a garden hose connected to the bottom of the funnel, so a pretty large hose compared to what I had before. So there's absolutely no way anything's going to get clogged in the hose, and I haven't had any problems with that. Actually, it did get a little bit clogged up one time still, amazingly. But in the 6 hours of cutting, it was only one time, and it wasn't fully clogged. It was just sort of slowed down a little bit. So that's been working pretty well. I still have not used that brushless motor that I got. Just using this brushed one because after I changed to using the Bluetooth connection for control, I haven't had any issues with that whatsoever. So about this frame that I cut there, you can see it's a one-piece, your unibody design where the legs and the main plate are all in one. And it's quite small, that's my hand there, but it is still a 5-inch quad. I don't really want to go into those sort of micro-sized builds very much. I'm a 5-inch quad flyer, I guess, and I pretty much will be from here on out, I think. I actually did cut my own frame already using this machine, so this is my custom design number 1, I guess you could say. But right about that time, I had just ordered some like professionally cut ones of these from Amazon, and not Amazon, sorry, Armatan, and this one that I cut was only 3mm arms, and I kind of wanted the 4mm arms that were the ones coming from Armatan. So while this is perfectly flyable, it has actually never been built up and flown, which is kind of a pity. It would still work fine, but I just recently began to get the itch to build another mini quad. You know how it is. It's been about 10 months since I did this last time, I think, so I've been holding out pretty well. But since I have 3 of these already, this sort of layout and everything, with just some minor configuration changes as I improve the design slightly throughout the process, didn't really feel like building another sort of a clone of that. And I wanted to try a unibody design. And I've noticed that when I don't have my GoPro on the quad, it's a hell of a lot more fun to fly, just being more lightweight. So I wanted to cut down on the number of bolts and things that we use, because this is, well, they're not all in there now, but it requires 12 bolts to hold the legs on. It starts to get pretty heavy. It's about 150 grams, the 4mm one, just for the frame itself. So that gives you an idea that it's not exactly one of these modern lightweight ones. So I wanted to go something that could be truly much lighter.
So as well as making it as lightweight as I could, I thought it was about time I also got up to speed on some of these more modern configurations that people are putting together for their quads now. In particular, I wanted to try making it with one of these all-in-one flight controller and ESC combos. This one also has current sensor and OSD on it as well, and it's a F3, yay! So yeah, you can get all that for $56 or so. It was actually $54 when I bought it a few weeks ago. But yeah, I've stayed away from these in the past because I always worried that if you blow one of the ESCs, then the whole thing is pretty much useless. But when I think about it, having flown these for a couple of years now, or more than a few years now, I have never actually blown an ESC, like overheated one. So I'm thinking it's probably going to be fairly safe. And the Racer Star stuff, although it's quite cheap, it seems to be reasonably okay. It's a really good value for money price point for me anyway. It's sort of, I don't want to spend too much money, but I don't want to buy crap either, and Racer Star generally seems to fit that bill for me. And the reviews look okay for this one as well. I got these motors here, so this is another sort of a step up into the more modern world for me. Usually I've just used the 2205 or 2206, but I see people using larger and larger motors like 2307 and stuff even. However, after getting these, I think I might just go back to using a normal 2205 anyway, because these add a fair bit of weight, and if my overall goal is to keep things lightweight, these motors are obviously more powerful, so they'll be able to pull that weight, but I think the power is overkill if you're not adding the weight to begin with. So I might just go back to some of the older 2205 motors, and I'll keep these for something else. The video transmitter that I got, I was looking around for video transmitters, and I always get those Eachine TS5840 ones that are like $12 or something, and they work reasonably well, but I just thought I'd try something a bit more fancy maybe this time. But I didn't really feel like going for a Immersion RC Tramp, which is, they're about $40, and the last one I had somehow died in a crash that wasn't even a very serious crash, so I'm not too keen on getting another one straight away. But I discovered this one, which looks quite interesting. It's configurable up to 600 milliwatts, and it has a heatsink on top, which is a nice feature, and it has one of these new, here's another point that's a modern feature for me, one of these new MMCX plugs, or is it MMXC or something like that. I'd never actually seen them until I saw this VTX, but apparently they're fairly common now. And you can also do some sort of a configuration of this on the, it has the OSD in it that you can use to configure it by the looks of it. So I'll figure that all out as I go. But I just thought this one looked quite interesting, and it's going to mount into my frame quite nicely as well. In keeping with the newer style of things, I've also seen these around, but I've never used one myself, so I'm going to give that a try. And the receiver I'm going to use is the FlySky X6B. I have actually used one of these, but I haven't really used it much. Oh look, there's a review by iForce2D. Yeah, but I never really used it much because I preferred the IA6B being in the case. It's just a little bit easier to mount with zip ties and foam tape and stuff. But since I'm I'm designing my whole frame around these specific parts, using these mounting holes, that mounting should not be a problem because I'm going to make a specific mount for it. And also, these props I have never tried either, but I hear quite good things about them, so I'm going to give some of these a try as well. So here are all those parts laid out on a plywood prototype to make sure everything was going to fit. I did, of course, make a full prototype and top plate as well, like that. That's those ones there, which were very useful as a template later on, as we'll see. But just to make things quicker, once I'd satisfied myself that the arms were okay, I just stuck to these smaller size prototypes. So everything fits on there quite nicely and just under 15mm vertically, but I'm using 25mm posts to make sure that I can clear the camera, and also because I don't really want the propellers to be coming above the top plate to where the battery is, in case the battery slips and the props cut into the battery. But everything, yeah, is fitting there quite nicely. It's the Runcam split board on top there, and I'm using this long cable, but that's only because I broke the other one. So ideally this would be the cable that comes, there's two cables you get when you buy this camera, and the other one's about half as long, I think, so it will just go to here and back. But this one will be alright. So what I was saying about the mount for the VTX there, I have them sort of crisscrossed. That's the X6B receiver underneath, and over here we just have a couple of standoffs. So they fit in there just nicely. I think that's a 10mm standoff, and there is actually a little bit of clearance, so the metal cans of them are not actually touching, and it's fairly solid, and it brings the video transmitter antenna to right about here. And the connections are sort of inboard there, and they have to go over to this section on the flight controller, so there's only going to be a little bit of wire there. I don't think I'm going to bother with the OSD that's on this flight controller. I'll just use my transmitter or the voltage telemetry on the radio control receiver to tell me when the battery's getting low. And the antennas for the radio control receiver come out just there, so they're sort of in the right place to stick up like that at the back of the quad. The way I've mounted the camera module for the split is a little unusual, and I may regret this later, but I think it'll be alright. But the problem is that it sort of limits me to this camera angle. Like, I cannot rotate this camera at all now, and the reason is because instead of putting the screw through the central, sorry, it's a bit hard to see, they're all black, isn't it? There we go. Instead of putting the screw through the central hole there and having that hole coming here and the module being a little bit higher up, I wanted to try and bring everything down lower so I could get it into 25mm vertically. So that's why I've used the top corner hole instead. But if you do that, it means that the bottom of the camera is actually going to be colliding with the base plate. So what I've had to do is cut a little groove along there so that the camera can sit into it, and that works fine. But then of course you can only rotate it about 1 degree like that. Fortunately, that is about the camera angle that I use, so I don't think it's going to be an issue for me. And I made a few repetitions, like I say, of this plywood. It's really good to have your own CNC machine at home now, so I can do all this stuff very, very quickly. Before I used to have to, the best I could do is print it out on paper and maybe stick this to foam board and then cut it out, and it's a pain in the ass. But when your machine can cut out one of these in a few minutes, makes it a lot easier to get things in the right place by physically mounting them instead of just sort of trying to picture in your head how it would all fit together. So that was really good. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. So I'm pretty sure, I didn't double check this after I made the last cut, but I'm pretty sure that this camera should also not be able to see these corners, and it's not going to be colliding with that front post, and there's just enough room in there to get in there. That's where the motor cables are going to have to go into the back of the flight controller inside there, and it's all fairly tight, but I'm pretty sure it's going to go together nicely. Originally I was planning on using one of these extension cables to go from the back of the video transmitter and then through this hole and mount on securely there with some screws, but it's going to be kind of cramped, and the cable's it's not really in a great way to route this around and get it all nice and tidy. But what I noticed after I'd made this, see, this is something I wouldn't have noticed if I was using just a piece of paper, but this has ended up exactly underneath the hole like that. So what I'm going to do is, obviously I don't want to use this antenna, although I will use that to start with, but I found that you can buy antennas like this that have that plug on one end and one of these on the other end. So I have one of those in the mail, and I'll probably be using that. And at this point here, I'll just put a rubber grommet or something in there so that the antenna is not going to be shaking around in there. Speaking of shaking around, is this normal? Doesn't really seem right. Like I say, I've never used one of these before, but that has me a little bit worried, but we'll give it a try anyway. So here's the original drawing board, and it includes some bits and pieces that never made it to the final design. So in addition to being a unibody design, which is new for me, another departure from my normal procedure is that I'm not using a true X anymore for this one. And the reason is that I wanted it to be as compact as possible, in other words, making the props as close together as possible, so there's about 7mm between them there. And in order to do that and still keep the two front props reasonably well out of the frame of the video camera, it sort of calls for making it a little bit wider than it is long. So it's a slightly rectangular design, and what is the wheelbase? I think it's about 210. Let's put this in here, hold on. Let's quickly see what that is. So it's 209mm from corner to corner. So in the shape for the bottom plate, I've used quite a few splines, which I really enjoy, sort of laying these splines out and trying to make them look nice and smooth and get rid of all those stress risers that we can't have stress risers, as you know. So that's how I've ended up with there. And because the ESCs are not going to be on the arms, they're quite a bit narrower than my previous design. They're 12mm across instead of 18. So there's a few bits and pieces, like I say, that didn't make it through. Originally I was going to have some cutouts here in the top plate so that if I wanted to, I could actually strap a GoPro on the top there, but I just thought I'm probably never going to do that, so I didn't leave them in. I did, however, keep these pieces in because I may yet want to put a normal FPV camera on top, like the Runcam Sparrow or something like that, just in case I decide that the latency from the Runcam split is not to my liking. So we have yet to see how that's going to turn out. There's a whole bunch of holes there that I didn't actually use, most of those as well, so just some of them are used. Anyway, but that's how it turned out. Now this piece over here, you can see that that has the top and the bottom cut off, and that is actually what I've ended up with this piece here, because I went to order some carbon fiber plates to cut this, because I was originally planning to make it from 4mm thick and probably 2mm thick plates, and then I realized that I had a couple of bits sitting around from when I cut that last frame that might just work. Now as you look at this here, you may think that it fits nicely enough that I was planning to do this from the beginning, but I swear it was just a coincidence, and it was thanks to the fact that I was trying to make everything so compact that it was able to fit in this 20cm wide piece with just I think it was about 15.5 centimeters of space vertically. And also the top plate, this was another pure coincidence. It fits in perfectly to about 0.5 millimeter. Well, actually I'm losing a tiny little bit in one point, but it almost perfectly fits into that little gap there that you can see in this offcut. Now, as I mentioned earlier, those plywood templates became extremely handy for getting the workpiece, the carbon fiber workpiece, in the right place on the CNC machine so that I could cut around it and get it exactly where it had to be. And I came up with a pretty easy way to do that, and you just use double-sided tape to stick the plywood onto the carbon fiber and drill into it just one hole in each corner, so just 2 holes, enough to get it in the right alignment, and then use the CNC machine to drill those same 2 holes in the wasteboard, and then put some screws through the carbon fiber and use those 2 points to position it, and then screw it down, and then everything was perfectly lined up. So for this job I used one of the high quality end mills that I got from a place called CNC Plus in Germany, and it's the first time I've ever really used them for a big job. I've done maybe just a 20 minutes cut before, but these cost about 8 times as much as the ones from Banggood, but boy are they worth it. I don't think I'll ever use those ones from Banggood again. Because this one did, I guess it was probably something like about 6 hours of cutting in total, and every single cut was flawless. There was none of that problem that I had before, where as you cut through, the width of the cut that you're trying to make gets slightly narrower with each pass. That did not happen, and I never had any problems with trying to push a screw through a hole that was supposed to be 3mm, but it was actually a little bit smaller than 3mm. So when I used the Banggood end mills, I had to go around and drill some of the holes out on my drill press later on to make sure that the screws could actually get through. But yeah, these end mills were just great, and they were only €8 each. So I mean, I say they cost 8 times as much, but €8 for one of these is it's totally worth it. And given what I know now about how well they cut, I could probably speed the job up a bit with a faster feed rate next time. I was using 0.8mm depth and 0.4mm per second feed speed. So yeah, I know it's pretty slow, but my machine is not very rigid, and I tried going a little bit faster than that, and I started to get not quite chatter, but sort of a small vibration. And when I backed off the speed a little bit, it just sounded so smooth, and it just sounded great, so I just left it with the slower speed. And even though it was running for quite a long time, I had no problems whatsoever. So here's how that turned out. It's a pity that there's some fairly big chunks missing out of the bottom plate, but the top plate, amazingly, was able to get away with just that little indentation there. That's the only piece that was missing from the original plan. And like I say, all the holes, screw holes and everything were perfectly done, and the edges of the cuts are quite nice. Can we focus, please? There we go. It's not really a professional job, I don't think, still, but it's way better than that other bit that I used, the Banggood one, and I've filed the edges off a little bit here, but I didn't really need to. So the design here, another departure from what I did last time was, see if you look at my other design, both the top plate and the bottom plate are a veritable Swiss cheese of holes there, and that was, I thought it would be good to, put zip ties through or have wires going through from one side to the other and so on, and just to cut down on the weight. But what I found is that all it does is let mud and grass and dirt and stuff get in, especially from the bottom when you're crashing. Oh, I suppose from the top too when you're crashing maybe. And I didn't really need a whole lot of zip ties around. If you want to have zip ties, you can use these ones here anyway. But I'm planning not to use so many zip ties on this one. So what I did was, rather than have a Swiss cheese of holes, I just kept it a solid plate pretty much. And there's a few reasons for that. One is to keep it stronger. Another is that it's less cutting time for the machine. And the third one I forgot, but there was another reason. Oh, it was to, especially on the top, you want to have sticky Velcro tape on the top here underneath your battery. At least that's how I do it. And I found that if I put it on here, there's not actually that much surface here for the Velcro tape to stick on. There's just this little bit there that's solid. So what I've ended up with is I only have holes where I'm actually going to use them. So when I mount all my stuff in here, well, we can see it on here, there's not actually going to be any holes, so all these holes will be filled and you won't be able to get any mud in from the bottom. I made a bit of a mistake here with this groove. What I intended to do was just cut this groove down about halfway, because this is 3mm thick and the groove only needs to be about 1mm to let the edge of the camera rest into it. But because my design is a bit of a smarty pants one, it's not actually symmetrical. So you can see these two holes here need to be on a specific side to mount the video transmitter in the correct orientation. And I mounted it on the machine upside down, so that meant excuse me, that I had to cut all the way through here because I was cutting from the top toward the bottom, which was kind of a bummer. And I guess the only other bummer is that it's 3mm and not 4, but I think for this quad, which is probably only going to be about 450, maybe 460 grams, I think it'll be fine. And I think 3mm, especially if it's unibody and there's no potential for vibration, or there's no sort of looseness in the arms where they might join on, it'll be fine. It's not going to break. So with 3mm and 1.5mm and all the spaces in and a little bit missing on there, it comes to 72 grams. A little bit more than I'd hoped, but I mean, it always is, isn't it? Let's just have a quick look at this all-in-one board. I'm not going to say too much about it because I've found some pretty good videos on YouTube already which explain it all in lots of detail. So we just have the ESC controllers and some of the FETs on the bottom and the current sensor resistor. And then on the top we have the rest of the FETs, and it looks like it's got some sort of a coating on it, doesn't it? Maybe it's a waterproofing coating. There are two 5-volt linear regulators on the right. Looks like they must just be in parallel to provide a little bit more current. I think it's the accelerometer there in the middle of the screen about there. It's interesting that you can still read all the labels on these even through the coating. And even those little FETs on the ESC, you can read that too. How about that? So yeah, obviously motors get connected there. I'm going to be mounting this 90 degrees to what the normal motor mappings are, so I think I'm going to have to change that in Betaflight to get the motor numbers in the right position. And it came with Betaflight, what was it, 3.1.6 on it, and it's calling itself an Omni. I'll probably just leave that on there, and this will be the first time that I've ever not installed my own firmware on the board after I bought one, but it'll be fine. And so the connections down here, you've got ground, well, it's very small, ground, S-bus, and then some 5 volts, so that is technically the only other connection you need to make other than the motors. So it's pretty cool that it's all in one place like this. If you want to use the onboard OSD, you can connect a ground and a video in and a video out there. I don't think I'm going to bother with that just for now. I suppose it would be nice to see the voltage. Well, we'll see. Apparently somebody made a mistake in the design of this board, and these little pads around the holes here are actually positive. So battery positive is connected there, which means that when you mount it, you're going to have to use plastic or nylon screws so that it's not touching onto the frame of your quad. Okay, I'm partway through the build now, and I've struck a bit of a problem. I decided to go with these new motors, these 2306 motors that I bought, because I couldn't really be bothered dismantling that other quad to take the old 2205s off to use it. But basically these motors are not very good from what I can tell. 3 out of 4 of them are making horrible sort of rumbling noises when I spin them up. So this one here, even that one's not that great, but that's reasonably okay. This one over here is not terrible, but you can hear a sort of a bit of an undulating noise, more vibration. This one is awful. Listen to that. And this one here is not much better. See that? So that's 3 out of 4 that I don't really want to use. So I think I will dismantle that other quad and use the old 2205s as well, because I mean I just was thinking, and this quad here weighs a lot more, and I'm using 2205s on here and it flies great, so I don't think there's really any need for these larger 2306s. Okay, I went back to the good old 2205 motors. I think these should be fine. So I have everything ready in a just about flyable state here. In fact, if I wanted to sling the battery underneath, it could fly just like this, or with some props, of course. And it's all very compact. Look at that. It's just it's barely 12 millimeters in height total, apart from these little plastic bits on the standoff. Okay, here it is ready for the first test flight. So it's just missing the runcam split and the video transmitter at the moment. And that is going to weigh in at, I think it's about 240 grams. Yes.
I'll just give it a quick test on 3S with 2-blade props. Well, it's pretty good. 3S, remember? Oh, it feels so light. Oh boy, yeah, this is great. This is only 3S. 4S is going to be a blast. Okay, first crash test. Maybe I didn't tighten these motor screws properly. I'm glad the arms didn't break. That would have pissed me off. Quite a crash for your first day out, wasn't it, little guy? Feels pretty good. A little bit of wobble there.
Here's how the wiring looks when you add the camera and the video transmitter. It's a bit of a mess until you cover it up with the runcam split on top. The receiver here has these two outputs that I'm using. This is for S-bus, or I-bus actually, and this one is for raw battery voltage sense. It's going to come over here and be connected under there. So these positions are quite nice and tidy. You just need a short little wire. And I'm taking power from the battery also for the video transmitter, and that has a 5-volt output which I'm using to power the runcam split, which unfortunately I ripped off the other battery or the power connector on the runcam split, so I'm having to use this big clunky USB connector, but I hear that it provides a bit more stable power than the other plug does, and yeah, I don't like this situation very much. but that's how I'm accessing the raw battery. And when you put the run cam split on top, it sort of tidies things up a little bit, but see how that sticks out there? That's kind of, I don't like that much. And as a weight comparison with the old quad, this is 560 grams or so with no HD camera on, and the new one is 460 with an HD camera. Now here's some footage from my first few FPV flights, and to be perfectly honest, I was fairly disappointed. The main problem was that the picture was pretty bad, and you can see some banding diagonal lines coming across there. That personally doesn't actually worry me that much. I know a lot of people don't like that, but I just sort of see through it somehow, I guess. The problem was that it was very, very dark. Now this is twilight, it's just after the sun's gone down, and I fly all the time with my other FPV cameras at this time of day, and it's no problem at all. But with the RunCam split, I just couldn't see hardly anything. It was just too dark. I couldn't see any definition in the grass, you know, the little tufts of grass and everything. I couldn't see any of that. For some reason we're actually seeing it not too bad in this footage, so I don't know why that is. The other problem was that there's a little bit of latency, more so than something like a RunCam Sparrow. So partially due to that, I think, and also due to maybe the tune of the more recent Betaflight version being a little bit different. It just felt a little bit mushy. I think that's something I can get used to, but the darkness and this sort of all-round unenjoyable view that I saw in my FPV camera just kind of put me off. As a comparison, here's some DVR footage from the Micro Sparrow 2, which I took about 15 minutes later, so it's actually even darker when this camera was when this footage was taken, but as you can see it's a lot more pleasant to look at and much easier to see where you're going. In fact, to tell the truth, I charged up 3 batteries to do this test, and I spent the second and third batteries on my old quad. Yep. The recorded HD footage was a bit better. It's about what you'd expect for that time of day, but unfortunately there was a reasonable amount of jello or jitter or something like that, and I'm thinking that's because the camera was quite hard mounted on the frame as opposed to how I'd normally do it with a GoPro Session, mounted on a block of angled foam and strapped down with a Velcro strap, which gives it a little bit of slight cushioning. And the audio was also pretty bad. I know the RunCam split and the RunCam cameras in general, the audio is not that great, but there's a sort of a metallic chattering kind of a sound coming from something, maybe the SD card slot where you sort of close down the SD card to hold it in. Whatever it was, something was vibrating quite annoyingly. Until now I've only used the RunCam split on a plane, and I mounted on a piece of plywood which is then stuck by a Velcro sticky tape thing onto the plane and zip tied down, and that again gives it a reasonable amount of vibration cushioning, which is probably the reason I haven't seen this before in any of my other footage from this camera. So that's all I have for this video. It's gotten way longer than I intended, as usual. I'll keep flying this quad, of course, and I'll tune the PIDs a little bit, and hopefully it'll be a little bit more to my liking in the future. But I have a feeling that I'm just not going to be using the RunCam split as my FPV view camera while I'm flying. I'll probably end up putting a Swift or a Sparrow up on top just in front of the battery. I know that's not a very safe place to put it. If you crash you might damage it, but to be honest I have a whole bunch of RunCam little mini cameras cluttering up my desk, so it shouldn't be a problem for a while. Anyway, hope that wasn't too boring. Thanks for watching. See you next time.